Good morning, afternoon, evening, night time for everybody. And thanks so much for joining the this webinar today. My name is Kathleen Brophy, and I'm the director of Publish What You Pay US. And I'm very happy to be facilitating this conversation today on kind of as a community for us to explore economically what's happening right now, the effects of the oil market kind of plunge and the impacts on oil-dependent economies around the world. And so today we're going to be examining, I think within the PWYP movement or network, we've always talked about the resource curse and the Dutch disease and these sorts of terms, and now we're seeing what does it mean? What does it mean to be economically dependent on oil? What does it look like in real time, and what are the consequences? I think is one of the things that we're seeing right now that we haven't we haven't always been aware of. We're seeing those on a global scale. We're seeing countries that didn't, were kind of just skirting by. They were dependent on, they were oil dependent, but they were still making do. And now that sort of economic planning or kind of lack of economic diversification is really glaring in this moment. So we're going to, I just want to kind of just set the context very briefly, and then and not take too much time, and then go into the wonderful speakers that we have today. So without further ado, we can start that. Emil, have you already given the announcement about the translations and the interpretation?
Yes, I have. It's working. Thank you.
Okay, great. So like I said, the agenda will run as follows. I will just begin with a brief intro to set the context. We'll then hear from Mr. Adnan Bahia from Publish What You Pay Iraq, who will be taking us through the realities of economic dependence in this current moment and basically what the crash has done for that economy. We'll then hear from Mr. GardBenda, who's the head of Publish What You Pay Uganda, who will be taking us through what this looks like for a country who is making their economic bet on oil. So they're not producing yet, but they have basically hedged a lot of debt, but a lot of their economy, their future economy, on oil. And so what does that look like, and who's going to pay the consequences for that should the oil market not return? We'll then hear from Madame Tatiana Sadova from Publish What You Pay Kazakhstan about their work on this issue in their domestic economy and tools that they're thinking through using on this issue of the oil economy in Kazakhstan. And then from Johnny West, who will be walking us through some of the tools that they've been thinking about to try to get some more information into the public domain in regards to oil economics. So I just, I don't need to, I don't think I need to explain to anybody that we're in a pandemic. I'm sure that's obvious to everybody. But it's so impactful, and it's and it's a very uncertain time. But within the pandemic, this whole dynamic of the oil market crash is something that we have been specifically following very closely. And so as many of us know, the oil market is it's boom and bust. That's how the oil market goes. So it's a very volatile market, and prices are always up and down. But I just want I just want to point out a few things about this current moment that make this different than the normal boom, and bust. So one of those is that one of those important things is that this boom and bust is happening in the context of the beginnings of a global energy transition. And so unlike in the past, you now have other sources of energy that are viably competing with oil, like renewables, that will affect whenever the boom comes back after this bust. It will likely look very different than in the past. So for the first time, we have these viable alternatives that are in the market that make it unlikely that this is just going to be another boom bust cycle, and then we will return to business as usual afterward. This is likely to have lasting effects. Some say that the oil market will never truly rebound. It's still too early to say, but it's definitely certain that what oil companies are experiencing, the global shut-ins of production all over the world, in some ways this is quite unprecedented. And so, as Publish What You Pay, like I said, we've always known that and advocated that complete economic reliance on oil is very risky. And for years, different members have advocated for healthier economic planning that prioritizes non-oil productive sectors of the economy, even in countries where oil could be basically supporting the entire economy. We've always advocated for a diversified economic planning. But today, unfortunately, we're seeing what happens when governments fail to do that. And the results can be catastrophic in terms of, when citizens need public services more than ever, governments are struggling to find out how to pay for those essential services, healthcare being chief among them. But while we're in this very unfortunate situation, the reason we wanted to have this conversation right now is that, with lots of these fossil fuel reliant economies facing hardship, what can we learn in this moment to push for better policy making, to make sure that this doesn't happen again, to make sure that our policymakers, hear the call for, less risky economic planning, because I want to reiterate that, this sort of economic planning, who's going to pay the consequences of this? It's citizens. Citizens are the ones who are not going to receive the public services that they need because of lack of government revenues. Citizens are the ones who will foot the bill for all of these things. And so it's vital that we prevent this from happening in the future, but also that in this current moment, we are able to talk about how economies can make themselves healthier right now. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So first step, I would like to, I can do this slide for our first speaker, who is Adnan. And Adnan, take it away.
Yes. Yes. Hello.
Yep, we can hear you.
Yes. I will share from my side.
Oh, do you want to do that? Or I can just do this. You can just tell me, I'll just go, you can just tell me next slide.
You must all set your presentation to share my presentation. Okay.
Okay, Adnan, you would like to share your screen?
I don't control from my side. I need to share my, but yes, now.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, now. This is from my side. You can see
Looks
it.
good.
Good?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I am Dr. Adnan from Iraq. Iraqi Alliance member and representative of MENA in PWYP Global Council. I will talk about COVID-19, oil dependency, and tools for advocacy, and will go to Iraqi case. Thank you. Introduction. Now, a new coronavirus, COVID-19, has caused a reduction, a global demand for oil more than 20% for all the world. Decreased the commercial traffic, air, sea, and land transport, tourism, and investment around the world. Abundance of oil supply, and that go to huge decline in prices. To control the level of production and the prices collapse, OPEC held a meeting with outside producers named OPEC Plus on March the 5th. The meeting closed without any agreement. Markets was flooded with oil after that, and the prices fell down below $20 a barrel. How this case impact on Iraq? Iraq is the second largest oil producing in OPEC, produce 4,250,000 barrel a day, exporting 3 by 4 million barrel, with the prices fixed by $53 in the budget for 2020, which accounted the budget, Iraqi budget for 2020 accounted $139 billion. In Iraq, $1 decreasing costed Iraq $1,224,000,000 annually. By $20, Iraq's revenues decreased about 41 billion. Revenues for 2020 will down from 78 to 37 billion. Budget deficit will increase from 52 to 93 billion. Economically, this unacceptable. You can see how the prices down and the actual revenues down, and impotency higher and higher. This is for February, March, and April. Iraq is afflicted with an entire economy depend on oil wealth. With current policies, can't achieve welfare or development. No serious steps to reduce dependence on oil revenues. No reconstruction or sovereign or generational fund. Mismanagement, increased dependence on oil revenues. Always general budget depend 95% on oil economy. Government ignored recommendations presented to correct the defect and diversifying incomes after prices recovering always. From 2006 to 2014, there was a big opportunity to change the economy process by getting more than 1 trillion profit as oil profit. But government preferred easy solutions based on expansion public spending, makes Iraq a large consumer market for neighboring countries' goods. Government jobs had become the main job opportunity for everyone. Current situation in Iraq. Iraqi economy fully depends on fluctuating oil prices, which are highly affected by political and economic changes. From 03 to 19, oil revenues exceeded $1.5 trillion. Government expenditures multiplied several times, but many times forced to borrow internally and externally to cover the budget deficit. These measures threaten the economic security. You can see now how the budget higher and higher with the oil export from 03 to 20. And for that, the budget higher and higher, but without any development on the ground. Uh, Iraqi Alliance for Transparency in Extractive Industries calls as a partner with PWYP coalition to inflate revenues and diversify them. Uh, in every wave of drop oil prices, government find itself in huge increases to provide solutions for budget expenditures. The calls quickly end when oil prices recover. It ignore advice, rationalize expenditures, stimulate investment, combat corruption. It's directed toward to expanding spending, creating job, just accommodate employment youth. Now, healthy landscape, fragile situation in Iraq, lack of launching budget, despite signing agreement of OPEC Plus to reduce production by 23% for May and June 2020. Economic landscape, Iraq share to reduce the production within OPEC Plus agreement 1,061,000 barrel a day. Iraq production will reduce to 3.5 million barrel. Iraq will lose another part of revenues. The negative foreshadow will clear in the next months. What's the options? The first choice, the government continues to play accountant role, receive oil revenue and spend them without any development. Iraqi people are constantly increasing by the high rate in the world, 3%, increasing about 1 million people annually, while oil revenues don't increase in the same time. Iraqi people suffered a lot from this policy and its results. It caused starting the 1st October demonstration, big demonstration, and still till now. This result on the ground is the housing crisis, 30%, lack of hospitals and health, 40%, private sector participation down to 9%, the lack of schools, 40%, unemployment about 30, poverty rate 23, poverty gap 5%, illiterate 23, a decline in the social and productivity role of women. The second choice, the government government recognize the mistakes in managing Iraqi economy, combating corruption, resource governance, diversify economy. It's must analyzing global indicators on Iraq, like the follow. Transparency Index. Iraq got 20 points out of 100, ranked 162 out of 180 countries. It's negative indicator for the business environment. This is the chart of the corruption precision report to 2019. Ease of doing business index issued by World Bank. Iraq got 172 out of 190 countries. The indicator consists data for investor to facilitate entry into Iraqi markets. Index of vulnerability, vulnerability country, failed country, issued by Fund and Peace and Foreign Policy magazine. Iraq got 99 out of 120 degree, guaranteed rank 13 only in 178 countries. It's a negative evaluation. Governance index issued by World Bank. Iraq got low rating 2, 3% in law enforcement, 7 fighting corruption, 8 government effectiveness. It's negative picture of performance to ensure stability, economic growth. This is the rank of Iraq. Iraq in the poor zone and had only 39 marks and depend on oil and gas only. Happiness index issued by UN reported 2019, Iraq get 126 rank. It's focused on 6 things: income, freedom, level of corruption, expected average age, social support, and generosity. This is the chart of happiness Iraq in the middle, in the poor zone. This is the best position, Iraq not here, and this is the worst positions Iraq have medium position. Suggested solutions. Short-term oil revenues increasing. Stopping export low prices, heavy oil, in exchange to expensive lighter oils. Commitment to OPEC Plus agreement to increase oil prices. Negotiating with companies to increase Iraqi cadres with its. Reaching agreement with KRG to hand over export revenues to federal treasury. Long-term oil revenues increasing. Develop and build new refineries to stop importing oil products using extract gas to electric power stations to stop import. Invest in gas in transport means to provide revenue and to protect environment. Improving financial management. Preparing a new budget with realistic oil prices, focusing on health and rations, putting roof between the highest and lowest salaries and prevent its duplication, encourage domestic product by eliminate tax customs on imported goods, developing Iraqi banking system, centrally controlling on all border crossing gates, issuing national oil and gas law to manage this important sector. Economy diversification. It's the best solution to build economy facing violent shocks. Oil must be a locomotive of economy to rise industrial, agriculture, tourist, trade sectors, developing private sector, investment, good opportunities to create youth employment. Speedily operate hundreds of factories with the new import policies to protect a national product and stop leaking out oil revenue that need a new legislation and fighting corruption. New view for oil as a strategic commodity. Oil is not longer a commodity subject to supply and demand. It's a strategic material for 10th countries such as Iraq, Algeria, Libya, Venezuela, and others its revenues, reforming more 90% of countries' budgets. Oil fluctuating prices don't allow secure sustainability of expenditures. Countries with large and diversified economics succeeded to reduce dependence on oil to 60% or less. The ethical decision is to account the interest of peoples in decent living. The negative impact for oil prices on millions in the event of low prices, the positive impact by accepting moderate prices for a producer and customers. The UN bodies must urge governments to implement strategic concept in dealing with oil, developing new policies for setting prices, creating a clean energy in order to protect human and environment, uh, preserve the right of generations to deal with the wealth around the world. Expectation. Iraq GDP is expected to shrink by 7 percentage in 2020. It's down from 4 by 4 percentage in 2019, recording worst performance since 2003. To go beyond this must go to private sector in industry, agriculture, and investment. If oil prices rise to $30, it's a good opportunity to reform measures to reduce the budget deficit. We must increase domestic product, which create new job for youth that government cannot create it now. Thank you.
Sorry, Kathleen, we cannot hear you.
Yeah. Hello. Thank you. I'm just reflecting on some of the.
Ms. Kathy,
I'm just
I
reflecting.
don't know, you heard me good or not?
Yeah, it was perfect. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I was just reflecting on some of the numbers. 95% of the budget that is dependent on oil, 40% of schools, public health infrastructure, that is kind of under provided because of the current budget crisis. And so I think you made the points perfectly. When we have the boom in the oil market, from 2006 to 2014, oil revenues needed to be invested in other productive sectors, and those sectors would therefore then provide more back to the economy rather than sole dependence on oil. That combined with the corruption issues, you have politicians who are not necessarily operating in the public interest. So how do you leverage, how do you have influence over them in this moment? Painted a really interesting, fascinating picture, if not somewhat incredibly unfortunate. So I really appreciate that presentation. It's a very instructive example, and I just suggest, or I encourage people to put your questions into the chat. We're going to keep going with our presentations, and then we'll do a Q&A with all of the speakers at the end. So if you have questions specifically for Dr. Bahia, that you put those in the chat as we continue. So we've heard from the case of Iraq, and now we're going to go to Uganda, like I said, which is a country that is not yet producing oil, but in ways has already managed to become economically dependent based on future revenues, based on loan deals that have been made based on future oil revenues for oil that has not yet left the ground. So it's a different, it's a subset of this issue, which is kind of future debt hinged on oil revenues. So Gard, are you there, and can you walk us through for about 10 minutes or so the situation in Uganda?
Miss Kathy, your sound not very good. It's interrupted many times.
Okay, thanks. Gard, have you been able to hear me? Gard, we don't hear you yet, but I see you. I'm still not hearing you, Gard. So Gard, we can try to troubleshoot some of your volume issues. Maybe Tatiana, we could go with the Kazakhstan case right now, and Gard, we can work on the mic issues.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Hello, everyone. Yes.
Hello. Как дела?
Hi.
Как дела? Хорошо.
Да, хорошо. Thanks. So yes, very happy to see some familiar faces like Dr. Adnan. I'm an independent consultant working in Kazakhstan, and I used to work for Publish What You Pay as the global AITI coordinator until last year. So glad to see some of my colleagues again. I do not have the presentation PowerPoint, but I do have talking points, which I will be happy to share. So yes, on Kazakhstan, we are ranked as the 16th oil producer in the world, and obviously we are commodity dependent. We are highly dependent on export of hydrocarbons, minerals, and metals. But basically, these are hydrocarbons, these are oil. This gives us 62% of our export, 44% of our state budget revenues, and about 17% of the GDP, consisting of the oil revenue. So we are highly dependent, less dependent as Iraq, as I can see. And I've touched on this later because the government made quite substantial efforts on reducing our oil dependency and diversifying our economy. But anyways, the main share in our state budget is made up obviously of tax revenues. This is 72%. And basically 50% of these tax revenues consist of the revenues of the taxes paid by the 30 largest companies in the country, which are oil and gas. So they represent oil and gas sector. So 72% of our tax revenues half dependent on the oil, on the revenues from the oil companies. And of course, when we talk about our budget forecast and socio-economic development, we consider such factors as the world oil prices, world financial factors. These are main factors taken into consideration when we speak about our state budget. So, of course, the situation which we face with the oil prices play a crucial role in our country's future development. Basically, Adnan has already mentioned how the OPEC and Russia disagreement and sharp decline in oil prices affected the world economy, and we are not excluded from this trend. Basically, we have the oil revenues go in two ways into our budget. One of the ways is the customs duties paid directly to our budget. And here I have to say that, of course, the decline in oil prices could deprive our revenue significantly. When we speak about export customs duty, if oil prices, when it failed to $25 per barrel, the customs duty reached zero. So we cannot rely on this revenue in our budget anymore, unless the price will remain so low, below $25 per barrel. And this will give us the budget deficit 1.2% of the GDP, only from the customs duties. And revenues from oil and gas exports will be reduced by 3 times. So these are when we speak about the customs duties. Just a second. Another way how oil revenues go into our budget is through the National Oil Fund. And basically, because we've been extracting oil for 150 years, which we celebrated last year in Kazakhstan. So 20 years ago, we've established the National Sovereign Wealth Fund, or National Fund of the Republic of Kazakhstan. And basically, that helps us significantly to counter the consequences of the pandemic crisis. And this would be maybe my, also Adnan mentioned that Iraq had not think about having establishing the fund, or maybe thought of it but didn't establish it. So maybe for countries which are at the beginner stage of the oil production, it would be good for civil society maybe to think about having this, some kind of sovereign wealth funds established. Because in Kazakhstan, sovereign wealth fund plays, of course, 2 usual functions of such fund, which is saving function for future generation and stabilization function to compensate the fluctuation of the oil price. And this is what we use the fund money now, basically. So during 20 years, I just wanted to say a couple of words about our National Oil Fund. It has grown almost 117 times in dollar terms. Of course, due to very good market situation with the oil prices previously. And as of January this year, the fund assets amounted to $71.4 billion US. If we compare it with the very famous Norwegian fund, we of course don't look that good with 1 trillion of the Norwegians money. And I recently actually made a series of the posts about national funds, and a lot of attention was paid to the comparison with the Norwegian fund. But anyway, we do have this money in our budget, and this is 42% of our GDP. And the National Oil Fund basically formed by 70% of due to the tax from the oil companies. So if we speak about the oil price decrease, it would mean that that the revenues of the national fund will obviously decrease too, right? And it's a finite amount of money, and if there will be no revenues, then who knows what we can leave to our future generations. So yes, how the national fund affect the budget? We do have the guaranteed transfer from the national fund to the state budget every year, and basically our budget was before the crisis was based on the average annual Brent oil price of $50. But when the prices collapsed, basically non-oil deficit was increased up to 10% of the GDP, exactly because of the increase of the guaranteed transfer from the national fund. Now, this seemed to be, the very logical reaction by our government. The question is now: is it the one-off action, or will the government continue to use the national oil fund money to, counter the pandemic crisis? Basically, the government says that it will be one-off action, and as of 2022, the transfer will be decreased. And basically, the government says that they will be trying to be less dependent on the oil revenues and on oil money. The government has already reviewed the budget, and before the end of the year, they planned the budget in accordance to the oil price at $20 per barrel. So this means that the government does not plan any revenues from the oil sector in coming months. And next year, as the Vice Prime Minister said, the government also plans the prices of oil will not be much higher than $20. So the government will not rely on oil revenues and increase the tax base of the non-oil sector. So this is how the government responded. Basically, coming back to the National Oil Fund, I have to say that already in January, February, revenues were 37% lower than during the same period of the last year. And basically, the revenues from the oil sector decreased by 43%. And this is actually 119 billion tenge. So we are talking about big amount of money which we might face losing because of the oil crisis. So coming back to the government, talking about economy diversification. Again, I just listened to Adnan, and it seems like Iraqi government didn't address it yet, but Kazakhstani government has been talking about it for years. And we've had several programs called like intensified industrial development programs, 30 leaders of the economy, etc., etc. And for example, tourism was one of them. Potential economic area for diversification, which we now know what's, I mean, the tourism was harmed one of the most by the pandemic. We also do have agriculture in our list, high value added processing plants, etc., etc. And international IFIs, I mean, that they support this diversification by their loans and different kinds of assistance. But nevertheless, the share of oil revenues has yet correspond to 35 up to 44% of the total budget revenues. And yet last year, when we had the big Kazenergy conference around 150th anniversary of oil production, it seemed like Kazakhstan will be relying on oil for quite significantly. Maybe now this will be really changed, not only on papers. I've read several researches around why the diversification didn't work out to the level it was supposed to. And one of the problem that was mentioned, that the government trying to increase the role of non-oil sector and the increasing government spending on these purposes, but didn't pay enough attention to the effectiveness of this expense. And as a result, the structure of economy remained unchanged. And hence, the budget remained deeply unbalanced and dependent on the national fund. So I would say that the civil society here, as a civil society here in Kazakhstan, we could identify the following advocacy priorities for us in coming months. One of them would be a call for transparency and accountability of the oil wealth spending, which means the National Oil Fund. We were discussing, because I am currently the member of the multi-stakeholder group in Kazakhstan, so we've been discussing with civil society to make a national fund and its transactions a center of future EITI reports. So this is how we are going to use EITI to leverage this. Another call with regard to the National Oil Fund would be maybe to have a proper website, because our fund does not have its own website. And again, if we look at the Norwegian experience, when they have beautiful, up-to-date site containing all the information about their oil money, this might be one of the directions of our advocacy. Second direction would be I would say the overall call for better transparency of the budgetary processes and budget spendings, maybe beyond extractive revenues and spending of extractive money. For example, our government has announced that they spend about up to 6% of the GDP to counter COVID in Kazakhstan. And last week, civil society activists, about 30 organizations, signed a letter to the president asking the government to be accountable about this spending, anti-COVID spending of the budget.
Maybe one or two more minutes, Tatiana, then we
yes,
could
that's I'm finishing. So yeah, so and closer monitoring of the state program focused on the economy diversification, non-oil economy. And the last would be, and this may be how that's why I think the forecasting, which John will tell us about later on, is extremely important at that particular time. Exactly because for oil-dependent money, when we see budgets crucially depending on oil prices, and sovereign wealth funds revenues, because we're talking here not only about current situation, but about future generations. So forecasting will be extremely important, and this will be our third, might be our third priority. That's it from my end. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. The mention and discussion of the Sovereign Wealth Fund is key here, since that is, of course, one tool that governments have historically used to smooth the boom-bust price volatility of oil. And so thanks for giving us more information on how that works in the Kazakhstan situation. Again, if you have questions for Tatiana, please put them in the chat and we will be addressing the questions in our Q&A. But thank you so much, Tatiana. That was very comprehensive in terms of understanding the current domestic context. Gard, how is your microphone now? Do you think we've,
yeah,
do you think
can
we're
you hear
better?
me now?
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah. So please, about 10 minutes or so, please, if you could provide us with more information about the Uganda situation.
You can hear me?
Yes.
You can. Okay, thank you. Yeah, on the group of VIP. I think I had the dropped. I was saying that. Hello. Yes, I was saying that I'm also happy to share that I'm a member of the stakeholder group of VITI. As you're aware, Uganda is in the process of this coming June. So we are trying to see how definitely, of course, we know COVID-19 has a little bit caused some disruption. Probably maybe let's wait and see what comes out of the EITI meeting in June, board meeting in June. Yeah, as for Uganda, I think by way of background, I think one is that first of all, we need to appreciate that recently Parliament has just approved a national budget of about 12.6 billion US dollars, and it's sad to note that the what URA, Uganda, Revenue Authority can only is projected to only collect about 5.8 billion US dollars, and I think for me that's very dangerous given the fact that they now puts our domestic revenue to about 48.2%, meaning that the 51.8% is going to be coming from borrowing. So, and here we, according to IMF and of course internal analysis, we continue to see that our debt continues to, our debt GDP ratio continues to skyrocket. We know that this concluding financial year, our national public debt was about was almost beyond the I mean, it was close to the risk threshold space, is about 45 point something %, and is projected actually to increase in the next financial year to about 49 point something %. So that's very dangerous. So, and then yet, of course, we know that why we have continued borrowing is because at least we have something that we can bank on. I think for me, I would think that the borrowing was in the continuous borrowing is hinged on the prospects that we have oil that is coming, and indeed we had been projecting that our production would be production would start in. We had actually, there have been change of timelines. However, the first one was 2018. Then it was increased 2020, and now actually it has now been shifted to 2021. So we are not even actually sure whether 2021 or 2022, it's we are going to achieve production. And that's very important because of course the oil revenue is projected to contribute about 5-6% of the GDP annually. You know, when we start production, and then we also know that actually consequently it would improve to about 10% at production peak. So you can see, but of course, then at some point, then you will see. Now, when it is at the peak, it's also projected that it would contribute about 30 to 50% of the national budget. So what does that mean? It means that we need to be very keen, especially during this period. And of course, you realize that a chunk of the what we are witnessing is the risk that we are likely to run into the loan unsustainability.
Gard, sorry to interrupt you. Could you maybe cut your video?
And especially when we see like lighter notes, on the lighter note, in terms of the fact that we are now, yes. Okay. Can I speak like that?
Yeah.
Better, yes.
Also, could you please turn on the radio or TV in the background, Gard, please? The translators are having difficulty hearing you. Thank you.
Okay, let me try. So then, meanwhile, I can proceed as they try to help me out.
No problem.
And so I was saying, yes, I was saying that with that analysis, you continuously see that really our dependence prospects are on oil and gas. But of course, when you also look at how the budget allocation and how much we are putting on the budget I mean in terms of financing the sector, you realize almost that over 70 to 78% of the sector contribution is external. So what does that mean? It means that all those projections actually are hinged on the external financing, and this at this time it has been complicated by the COVID-19 simply because it has complicated further the process of securing the financial investment decisions. So we are yet to see those investment decisions, and therefore, if we cannot get the investment decision for various projects, especially the refinery, the crude oil pipeline, the East African oil crude pipeline, we continue to really find it a very big challenge for government to be able to finance the already burdened economy. And of course, definitely you realize that, of course, it has been some kind of front loading in terms of debt acquisition, and of course, then and you realize that actually now a big chunk of the budget, which is about $1.1 billion is going to be on the interest payment. And you know, we are only calculating that on without actually factoring in the amount of loans that were accumulated during the COVID-19 response. So you have got a lot of money, which I haven't actually factored in my presentation, but it's a lot of money. We have got some money recently. We got some money from IMF, I think $500 million US. So some quite chunk of big monies, and yet we are now not sure whether really the production is going to be soon. And so it's a little bit much sort of something that we need to really begin focusing on. The second thing I would say that yes, I think there could be not all exhaust, because you know, in terms of the cost, because when we were discussing with some of the actors within the UNOC and the Uganda National Oil Company and the Petroleum Authority of Uganda, they were saying, no, I think the different negotiations have continued. And actually they were saying that really they are doing well, given the fact that they were saying that if you look at this point in time, because most of the tools elsewhere, the cost is cheaper. So in a sense, there's a sense that maybe if we are more prepared and strategically engaging, probably this would be the right time for us now to engage further as we prepare for production. So but of course the challenge has been the other challenge has been the transparency and accountability in the management of oil revenue. And I think, Kathy, you know very well that most of the provision of the Public Finance Management Act 2015 have not been adhered to. You have had actually in the last financial year, there was, I think, there was an approved withdrawal of resources of monies from the petroleum farm beyond what was appropriated by government. So the continued breach of Section 50 of the Public Finance Management Act is already an indication that really we are in a risky situation, especially when we have to be mindful of how much we are accumulating in terms of debt. And then we also need to look at the invoices from the international oil companies, in terms of recovery costs. Yes, according to the recovery costs report, I think, Kathy, you could have read the report by Oxfam and CESBAC. We realized that they were you know, the hiking of the prices by the joint venture companies, and some of those you know, costs were being approved by the Petroleum you know, Authority of Uganda, and some of the monies actually were disallowed by the Auditor General. The office of the were queried by the Office of the Auditor General. So in a way, there is a risk that if we continue, you know, propagating those channels from where we lose resources, and yet we continue to, you know, to the debts or loans, then we are in great trouble. And I sense that as civil society and the other actors, I think the citizen will not be able to benefit from their oil, but rather it will benefit those bureaucrats. And yes, Kathy, you have a question specifically that I wish to.
Great. Thanks so much, Gard. Really helpful. Yeah, so I mean, the situation that you've described is one, you know, is like we said, oil has not yet left the ground, and the decisions to incur such high amounts of debt hinged on oil production is looking, you know, very risky, and it's because the debt keeps ballooning in anticipation of production. As production gets further delayed more and more, the fiscal space for public spending gets less and less. And so, you know, that's a really hard situation for citizens to be in, waiting for this promised oil revenue, but in the meantime, so little going to public spending at this moment in time. And a few points. I mean, one, you know, I think it's really, and it's an ongoing conversation for us all to have within Publish What You Pay. The energy market is changing, and so, you know, what does this mean that these countries that certain countries that have not yet produced are planning and waiting on kind of an economic miracle for a future oil sector in their domestic case, even though the energy market is shifting? Is that risky? Does it put citizens in jeopardy? You know, I think we should talk about, you know, what is a gamble that these governments are making on behalf of citizens without their consent, basically. And then the other issue that everybody has brought up, of course. Yeah?
Just to add something small, Kathy, I think you raised an issue of the community participation and expectations. And I think because of COVID-19 situation, we continue to see that most of the operations, of course, are on hold. And therefore, if, for instance, people who had been already, especially on the implementation of the settlement plans, where you know that some people were expecting money in terms of compensation, and they are, they had already given out their land and blah blah. So you can see the pain that they are going through because they cannot be settled, they cannot be paid. So yet they need to eat. Then they do not now. There is an addition of misery of the lockdown. So you see that it's really a very big challenge, and even there is no indication that out of those monies that are being borrowed, ideally, there are those special kind of scheme that is going to cater for such people that are in waiting.
Thank you. That's I mean, yeah, the impacts are so far-reaching. Exactly. Thanks for that reminder. So we're going to turn to Johnny now. I mean, the last point I want to make before transitioning to him is that we need to remember that these are all policy decisions that these governments are making, right? So a lot of times governments or other actors, they act like these things are just inevitable. They're just inevitable market realities. And it's a policy decision to create an economy that is dependent on oil. That is not necessary. There's other options, right? It's a policy decision to hinge all of your debt Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Can anybody still hear me?
Yes, we
okay,
can.
Sorry. Okay, sorry. For some reason, I lost my video. It's coming back. So it's a policy decision, right? And so what Johnny's going to walk us through now is some models and tools to try to start analyzing these policy decisions more in a way that kind of gets more information. Some of this budget forecasting that governments are doing and the decisions that they're making thereafter. If citizens had more information on that, how could it potentially contribute to healthier policy making? So that's what Johnny's going to walk us through.
Thanks, Kathleen. I will keep video off because my connection's a bit shaky, but I wonder if you could put the slides up.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people on this call, so I won't assume that everyone is familiar with myself and Open Oil. I'm Johnny West. I'm the director of Open Oil, which essentially specializes in doing financial analysis of natural resources for public policy. Yeah, I think that'll do. So if you could just flip to the first slide then. The key thing here, the first thing I want to introduce actually, and I'm conscious of time, is that although the COVID-19 crisis has very much sharpened the need, we were actually coming anyway to what was an opportunity in terms of running financial analysis for public policy, round about now anyway, because of the kind of cumulative history of success, basically of all you guys and the transparency community more broadly, which is, you know, all of those very long and sometimes painful campaigns around project level disclosures, more granular data, contract transparency, has now built up within public domain, you know, accessible data, enough data to be able to switch, not entirely obviously, but to take on, as you can see on the column on the left here, scrutiny of what's going to happen, not only what has happened. And I think, as I say, I think we've reached this momentum actually anyway. It's just that COVID-19 presents both the urgent need to do this and you know, a kind of greater readiness to contemplate it. So what I want to do is then just very quickly show you a couple of use cases that then relate to using all of this data, both in the EICI reports, project level disclosures mandated through other mechanisms, the 2,500 contracts now online, etc., to show how it relates to things we want to know in this pandemic crisis. So use case one is just short-term revenue forecasting. Can we put that into an open source public domain context so that we are not just relying on somewhat haphazard, arbitrary decision-making by people who run it behind closed doors at the moment? And use case number two, what are the other ways we could look at this moment now in terms of liabilities that the state might incur on behalf of the public? And clearly, in terms of the three countries we've heard from now, use case one corresponds to Iraq and Kazakhstan, use case two corresponds to Uganda. Kathleen, if you could flip. So use case one, revenue forecasting. This is just an example of something we'd actually did in December when Saudi Aramco was floating. Saudi public finances were on a downward trend already. That big solid line down represents, you know, an increasing amount of debt that was going to happen if a central price forecast happened, and then all of the dotted lines above and below it represent, you know, the same progress under different oil price scenarios, and then the shaded line at the bottom is, you know, policy trouble. In the Saudi case, that means very soon, and this is pre-COVID, so those curves would go down even more sharply now. We haven't revised this since December. Very soon, the Saudi government's going to get into the space of having to either devalue the Saudi riyal or significantly increase interest rates in the Saudi riyal. And both of those are extremely sensitive politically, you know, because the social contract in Saudi Arabia depends on a lot of petrodollars being splashed around and the value they buy, you know, both inside and outside Saudi Arabia. So, you know, that's kind of classic revenue forecasting. If you could flip to the next screen. Next slide, please. If that's right. So let's look at it now in the context of this crisis. So we clearly, of course, in oil producing countries, everybody understands instinctively that when there's a massive price collapse, there's going to be you know, big pressure on public finances, and there'll be much discussion of that. Here's just some an article chosen at random from Nigeria. So of course there's public debate, and if we can go to the next slide. These are quotes just culled out of the article preceding. But it's important for us to distinguish between, yes, there's a public debate and everyone knows the general direction of travel, and is there a methodologically sound, publicly available, specific tool, which is also, and I think this is a really key point, updating in as close to real time as is possible given the data that you need to go into it. And that actually means by the month. I mean, Dr. Adnan was showing February, March, April in Iraq. I mean, in most oil producing countries, you can find last month's actual production, and you can find last month's spot prices, which are the beginnings of a set of calculations and judgments. So to compare that to what we see here, which is, you know, even good journalism is talking to people on the record, off the record, then you get someone's opinion, but, you know, no article is quoting you the workings which led them to that end result, and so on and so on. And the whole question is more urgent than that, and requires more rigor, and more rigor in the public space. So if you could flip to the next slide, please, Kathleen. So what we are proposing there, and we have agreed actually with the Secretariat at EITI to run this in 2 or 3 countries, is to look at the accumulated data, which in many EITI countries now goes back over a decade and across lots of you know, movement of price in the markets previously, combine it with a read of fiscal interpretation across the range of contracts operating in that country, which is not trivial but not impossible, and then use that to build a methodology which, when you put any particular price prediction for the price of oil in now, will then compute out what the next 12 months look like, what the remaining part of this budget cycle looks like, and will update itself from, you know, month by month, from you know, the latest spot prices, the latest specific production and export figures, and so on. And that entire operation to exist in public domain. So the data obviously downloadable, but also the source code, also the methodology, allowing it, using the, you know, the model of open source software development, to be improved over time. We are actually just now starting the first step in that is to benchmark it, which we are doing by taking all of the IMF commodity revenue predictions, which they've done in Article 4 reports in something like 25 countries over the past 20 years. We're now comparing their predictions to their reported data the following years to get a benchmark for what a margin of uncertainty looks like. And it's probably not a big surprise, but you know, there is a massive margin of uncertainty in those historical forecasts. So we feel that we only need to do, you know, as well as the IMF historical forecasts with mechanisms that are entirely in public domain, to be able to shift this, you know, quite vital function into public domain, you know, pretty much in its entirety. And then we're no longer dependent on whether the right international experts have turned up, whether they've managed to have fruitful conversations with their national counterparts, whether their counterparts are directed by their minister to disclose useful information to the public or not. We remove all of those uncertainties and just put it in the public domain. That's the goal. If you could flip the slide, please, Kathleen. So that's use case one, which is short-term revenue forecasting and clearly applying to countries which are in the thick of production right now, you know, Iraq, Kazakhstan, Nigeria, Ghana, wherever else. And as I say, we are just starting that now this week, in fact, with a kind of seed project with the EITI Secretariat. Use case two, I guess, talks a bit more to Gerd and Uganda and many other so-called new producer countries, you know, Senegal, Mozambique, Tanzania, Kenya, Lebanon, Cyprus, and, you know, there's a very long list there, where there are some very different issues. It's also a different modeling task, where you're really looking at the entire lifetime of individual projects, I think, because, well, there's a range of public interests that need protecting there, but a lot of them actually revolve around whether the state is going to increase or add any exposure to fossil fuel production one way or another. I mean, you have the so-called pre-source curse, which existed in Ghana and also in Mozambique, where you have public debt, and sorry, Gerd, I think also mentioned it in Uganda, public debt taken on before any oil revenues have been earned. So any question of additional debt, which you could imagine many governments being, you know, attracted to, given the chronic problems all governments are going to have this year in terms of financing their budgets. You also have the specific mechanisms relating to a national oil company taking on a direct stake in a joint venture, which in most cases involves essentially borrowing from the project at interest, and therefore relies on a particular view of you know, future oil price in oil revenues and so on. And there, just to take you back to what Kathleen was saying right at the beginning, which is we were just getting towards a question of whether energy transition policy and technologies combined were going to lead into a long-term structural decline in price when COVID-19 hit. And so we now face the question of whether the total short-term collapse, you know, may ever bottom out enough before it intersects with the longer-term structural decline in prices anyway. That is, you know, no one has a crystal ball for that, but those scenarios clearly for proper risk management now need to be explored. And so that last question there of what does the overall revenue profile look like for governments in any new project? And, you know, these analytics have always been run in terms of life of project. You know, if you look at the standard way that those are all modeled, and it's kind of like, well, should we be doing that anymore? We are increasingly trying to persuade the people that we do modeling with and for, including civil society, including also governments, to say, let's just find a way of downplaying any expectation of revenues past 2030 to begin with, and then see how that interacts with the classic contractual pattern in which investor invests billions of dollars, very long lead appraisal development times, a slow ramp up of production, then first phase of full production needing to recover the costs sunk up front, etc. You get, I should have perhaps put in an extra graph, very distinct possibilities of two lines kind of crossing each other, you know, the need for money and the money actually arriving. If you could just flip to the next screen. And I'll just close out because I realize time is sensitive. This is just an example from Senegal. Each of those lines represent a kind of net revenue path for the state oil company in Senegal, depending only, and again, this is pre-COVID, we should redo this, but depending only on when a project goes into production. We hold all other assumptions the same in terms of the amount of time it takes to get into production and the overall capital costs and so on. But we then measure the delays of getting into production against a scenario of a long-term structural price decline, which in this case we've pulled from an IMF working paper. And you can see the line on the left, if you like, they all dip by nearly $1 billion because that's the loan that the government of Senegal needs to take against the project to finance its share of capital costs. And then it's going to pay it back. And eventually you can see in the first two lines, which are, you know, the first line is actually the oil field that is being developed right now, but that was discovered in 2014. So what this is showing you is that exactly the same field, if it was discovered today, and remember discovered would be several years after contract signed to explore, it would be much closer to the line on the right, in which the same debt is taken on, but now you're so much later and so much further into a long-term structural price decline that the revenues are never generated to give the state enough of a share of revenue to even pay back the loan. So those last three lines you see there represent total net losses. Basically, the state not only never earns a penny from exercising its direct stake, it is out, and it could be out by hundreds of millions of dollars because it's decided to share in what will become a stranded asset. So that kind of long-term analysis is use case 2. And maybe I should just stop there.
Okay. Thanks. Let me stop sharing. Great. Thanks so much, Johnny. I mean, so these are, so as we've structured it, you know, we're talking about the context and some of the issues, and then we wanted to present some of these tools for discussion that Johnny and others are already working on. So the Senegal case is something that they've already worked on that case. And what you're bringing up, so for a long time we've been, as you've said, we've been looking at the use of revenues in the past tense. So how you know, what was the deal that was made? What revenues did the government get, and how and where did they go? And now with so much uncertainty, and also, you know, a very quickly and permanently changing global energy market, we do, as you've said, we really need to be looking forward. What assumptions is our government basing their policy decisions on? So for instance, in Nigeria, like, we didn't realize our government was making a $60 a barrel or more price assumption for the entire government budget. So what assumptions are being used, and what risks, you know, what risks are being taken? And this last point that Johnny made is very important. What risks are being taken that I am liable for? So it's somebody else making a decision that you're going to pay for, right? So it's like, oh yeah, you know, I gambled away this much money, and by the way, it was your money. Do you know what I mean? I mean, it is. It's so this whole idea of citizens acting in, governments acting in trust of the citizens has always been one of our fundamental, you know, beliefs, is that we have to hold government accountable because of that. And so what are the decisions that they're making? And I think that oftentimes we do a lot of expenditure tracking work. Like that link is very obvious. Like we pay taxes and we want you to spend them according to the ways that you state in the budget. But like there's just all this other money that doesn't exactly fit in to expenditure tracking as we know it. So that's the debt incurrence. I mean, that is money that takes up fiscal space separate from and it crowds out spending on public services. So there's like a whole lot of kind of outside of the conventional expenditure tracking, we need to be just monitoring how government is managing its money in every way, shape, and form. And it's even more important for oil-dependent or potentially future oil-dependent economies now that we are in a global energy transition, and now that we are at this exact point in that transition, which is a complete oil market crash. And so that's what we've seen today is kind of the necessity for that, and then some tools that we can be using potentially in that endeavor. And I invite you to, as you've been doing throughout the session, to put questions for Johnny in the chat, as well as interest. We'd love to see who's interested in using these tools. So in the chat and the Q&A, please, if you want to work on these more and want to learn more about these tools, please also share that information with us in the chat so we can follow up with you. Okay, so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a quick fire round. So I'm going to go to each panelist and give them 5 minutes, and I'm going to be strict with this so that we can hear from every one of them before we close. 1 or 2 questions that we have from the chat. So I'm going to start with Dr. Adnan. 2 questions for you. First, what could be the role of Publish What You Pay or civil society at large in Iraq when it comes to improving the management of the petroleum sector in the country? So that's your first question. And then the second question is, what does the loss of government revenue, what does that really mean for women, men, and young people in Iraq? So, for instance, with the revenue sharing policy in Iraq, you know, this likely has significant impacts on budgets of local subnational governments, and hence it has a lot of the revenues are not only going to be lost at the national level, but also at the subnational level. And how does that affect local development projects and the lives of citizens? Those are your 2 questions, Dr. Adnan, please.
Yes, it's clear. For the first question, the role of CSOs, we have in Iraq EITI, يعني منظمة الشفافية, the Extractive Industries, yes, transparency, and we have a coalition alliance. This alliance part of Publish What You Pay, and we take the vision of Publish What You Pay and transfer it to the plan and work of our alliance, and we make a good transfer of the goals from Publish What You Pay to our alliance. For example, we put the human in the heart of extractive industries, and we must put the revenues to serve the human in all Iraq. We don't allow the government go to take money and expand expenditures without any services for population in all cities. I show you the suffer from the government policy. For that, always in every year we have meetings, make suggestions, recommendation, put it to the parliament, put it to the MSG in the ITI, and we make, for example, in this pandemic, we make the committee from 10 members and make a policy paper, how to get out from the crisis. And we published this paper and send it to many political parties, to the government, to the activists, to the experts, and make many series, episodes by radio to share the suggestions and solutions to get out from this pandemic. Now we are supporting new elections in Iraq, supporting a new government which is formed by 2 weeks ago, and we are looking and analyzing the decisions which is get from this government to analyze the situation and how we can help other establishments, directions, how we can do something like initiatives to get out from this pandemic. Yes. For the second questions.
Just 2 minutes more, thank you.
Yes, yes.
Go ahead, you have
okay,
2 minutes
yes.
more.
Yes, we don't allow for this government. We have a big budget, and we are borrow from the World Bank and other countries to help our population. We need new budget for yes. This budget must go to the services, to the health, to the ration, to the salaries. For example, the difference between the highest salaries and lowest salaries about 100 times, and this is a huge difference. For example, we have some positions have 2 or 3 salaries. We we have now 10 years ago we have 40 ministries. Now the government work with only 15 ministries. That means we can't go to some solutions. Iraq have about 82 embassy around the world, and it's not useful now. Yeah. For that,
thanks so much.
we need for new formation for the political process and how to raise the human rights, raise the safe living for people, not for distributing money and corruption.
Perfect. There were a few more questions for you. There were several questions. We won't get to all of them, but we will share your questions with the panelists so that we can share out when we share the notes. But thanks so much, Dr. Bahia, again, for those responses. Tatiana, if I could go to you, the first question in your, and Dr. Adnan touched on it, but how does it work in Kazakhstan? And you spoke about it a little bit, Tatiana, but in terms of leveraging the EITI for some of this advocacy, our groups in Kazakhstan, how are they leveraging the EITI space for influencing around these issues of oil revenue management? So that would be one. And then the second question for you is about the Sovereign Wealth Fund. So I'm just wondering, how long can, at the current Sovereign Wealth Fund, how long can your Sovereign Wealth Fund sustain or fill the gap in your budget? So what's kind of, how much money are you working with? Is your government investing part of the Sovereign Wealth Fund in some of the diversification that we talked about, in some of the productive investments, in order to make the economy less dependent overall on oil? And relatedly, how are the sovereign wealth fund expenditure decisions made? So who decides where that money goes and why? So 5 minutes for you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. On the EITI, we've just actually completed the second validation and the waiting of the corrective measures from the EITI International Secretariat. But to our knowledge, there are obviously issues around quasi-fiscal expenditures, around state-owned enterprises, and around transportation costs, for example. So basically, because state-owned enterprises play extremely important role in our economy, if we compare with OECD country, I think we have twice as more role of the SOEs, and basically oil and gas are also managed to a large extent by SOEs. So we will be basically using the EITI, as I mentioned, for because it has been a discussion around you know, how to make EITI reports like more useful for the public debates and for meaningful civil society and citizens' participation in decision making. So we are discussing now if we could focus EITI reports around 1 or 2 really vital issues for our economy. And for the nearest future, amongst civil society, we've identified sovereign wealth funds management as one of the potential focuses, and SOE's efficiency and management as a second one. So this is how we will be leveraging EITI in this regard. And but again, coming back to Johnny's suggestion around you know, forecasting, we've also have you know, quite some explorational work. And for us, it will also be useful, not only, you know, the short-term forecast for predicting budget revenues, but also long-term forecast around new projects. So that this is what we can also reflect in EITI reports, reflect on. On the sovereign wealth funds, yes, we currently have around $41 billion at our sovereign wealth fund. There are, you know, that has been some discussions and prognosis around for how many years we could use national funds money in case there will be, you know, no revenues, but just spending on the level which we have now. Expert says that it could be around 6 years. So we could use our fund for about 6 years. But because, as I mentioned, it has 2 functions, stabilization and future generation, saving for future generation, I think it's extremely important to, you know, keep some amount for the future generation. So proper management of the sovereign wealth fund is very important. When it comes to the decision making, and that's why I also mentioned that this is very important for us to make it transparent, because the decision making, it's made by the committee governed by the president. How actually the decisions are made, that this is not a transparent procedure. Basically, the fund goes as a transfer, guaranteed transfer to the budget, and then, you know, within the budget, it then distributed, you know, for diversification projects. So we cannot say like that the fund's money were used directly for some diversification project, but they were, because, you know, it's an important part of our budget is transfer. So that's why, you know, the decision making, the transparency around its spending, the public discussions around it are very important in our case. You are on mute, I think. I cannot hear
yeah,
you.
Sorry. No matter how many Zooms I do, I'll always forget to unmute. Thank you so much, Tatiana. That's very helpful. I had some of those similar questions myself. Johnny, maybe a tough one for you. Why not? So we have a lot of questions about sub-Saharan countries that are dependent on oil. So with very potentially in some cases extreme lack of diversification in the economy. And all the other sectors being fairly weak performers so I mean the entire economy is in a pretty weak position, and of course the dependency on oil is risky. In your experience working in several sub-Saharan African oil dependent countries, or the case of Uganda and Senegal, which you've also worked, countries that are considering future oil economic dependency, what would you suggest for a country like Chad, for instance, that's really dealing with the price crash has been a really heavy blow on the economy, and they're very, very much struggling because they're so dependent and weak, except for their oil revenues. What would you, if you were a policymaker or an advisor to that government, what would you say would be the best strategy for the way forward for an economy that looks like the economy of Chad or the economy of Nigeria, for instance?
That is a tough question. Yeah, it's like, that is well, I think the first thing is that, of course, all economies which have developed that kind of dependence share some features in common, but they also have high specificities. So I would be, even more reluctant to offer general advice. Perhaps I could shrink the question a little bit to, what would be the processes to put in play in terms of how to think about the problem rather than what potential end solutions are, because I don't feel qualified to say that. And ultimately, it's really important to say that ultimately all those solutions are and must be political. So there's going to be a limit to, there are very genuinely legitimate different sets of priorities around this, that, or the other. One country may build a consensus around strong devolution of revenues, another one may not. It's hard. So, the end decisions are always going to be essentially political decisions for the citizens of those countries. But in terms of ways to think about it, I think you put your finger on it earlier when you mentioned the idea that governments tend to think, I mean, not just present, I think, do them the credit of actually believing themselves that these are somehow just the immutable laws of nature, almost. And there's another factor, of course, in play in the case of fossil fuels, is that because governments just see it as a revenue source, they don't have to put cash in initially, then they see it as being in a fundamentally different category to other economic development options. So that, even if you're cynical about whether you're going to get a fair deal, and even if you recognize volatility in the markets and so on, you could put all of that together and say, well, yeah, you're right. We could end up getting, less than a quarter of what, our bullish advisors are telling us out of this project in the end. But as it's for free, why don't we just go ahead and do it anyway, if you see what I mean? And, in its own terms, that's a perfectly rational and logical way to look at things. So the question is whether there are broader perspectives to be brought in. Now, in general, I think that gets tricky because there are no set standards. We've looked for this and not found it. And in fact, we were involved last year in a Brook sprint to write a book on how you would model for sustainable development. So I've contributed to a book about it, and I still don't feel like I know anything about it because serious, because nobody knows anything about it, I would say in my own defense. Somehow the SDGs, which have been around forever, have not translated into workable techniques by which we can arrive at, you know, in a kind of consensus around the tool thing, of the kinds of debates you're talking about, where you kind of say, well, yeah, but what about primary food processing? The agricultural sector is a great employer, not very much added value there, but, you know, here's what a primary food process, here's what a canning factory or set of canning factories looks like, or here's what tourism looks like in comparison to, here's what, you know, the costs and benefits of our higher education policy that we're hoping to fund out of petrodollars is, et cetera, et cetera. Still, there are not agreed methodologies. And this is an important point, I think, for everyone on this call, because it means if an expert tells you that, you know, or implies, or, you know, their manner suggests that there is a known, you know, scientific answer to this, you should be highly suspicious. So, sorry, I'm offering a bit of kind of vagueness. One specific thing I would say is when we get to this question of new producer countries and their potential new liabilities, something we'd like to do as a next stage in Senegal, and I think it would be relevant in many African countries, is to say Uganda, what is Uganda's commitment that is required in order to make the sector happen in terms of its share of building or guaranteeing finance for a pipeline and or refinery and or the joint venture? That's a sum of money. What would that sum of money look like if it was the same forms of direct investment and state-backed guarantees were put into solar? You should recognize that that's just a thought experiment. You know, plenty of environmentalists will say you can't do a straightforward swap, but we're talking here also in terms of advocacy. So it's not that you're necessarily saying, well, we should absolutely go ahead and build these massive mixed grid solutions, etc. But as a thought experiment, as an advocacy point, I do think that's something that would be a pretty safe way forward, you know?
Right. Okay, we'll have to end, unfortunately. This could go on and on, but for most of you, it's the end of your day rather than for me, which is the start. So, Gard, there was a couple of questions for you. We'll follow up with all the speakers to get those last questions to them and back to you all. There's some very good ones in there. So apologies that we couldn't get to all of them, but we really had a lot of good content to get through from the speakers. We hope today we've presented you with some of the details of what this economic crisis of oil dependency looks like, and started to talk through some of the options for advocacy for civil society, some of the tools to get more of this information in the public domain, and some more of this forward-looking information to say what are the decisions that are being made about our tax dollars from now to the next 10 to 20 years, and what do we have to say about them, basically, in the context of even more oil market uncertainty and the need for, obviously, a more sustainable transition for these economies. So I wanted to thank the speakers so much for your time. You're all experts in your own right and could have spoken for 2 hours, so I really appreciate you trying to give us the condensed version. We'll be sending out, like I said, the notes, answers to questions, and recording to all the attendees. And we hope that this sparks more conversation. If you like the tools, for instance, that we presented, please follow up. And feel free to follow up with any other speakers so that we can all figure out throughout the network how to continue working on this issue together. Thanks so much, everyone.